Well, welcome. I'm excited you guys can all join us for the Cloud Engineering Leadership Panel. We've got a great bunch of folks. I think the best way to start is to start by introducing ourselves. So my name is Eric. I'm co-founder and chairman of Pulumi. And hopefully these names ring a bell with you because they are all industry luminaries in their own way, but I'll let them start by introducing themselves and talking a little bit about what they do in their current roles and maybe a little bit about past history. So why don't we start with Grace?
Thanks, Eric. So I'm Grace Francisco of Cisco, and yes, I'm originally from San Francisco, but not there right now. And I work as the Vice President of Developer Relations Strategy and Experience. And so that for me includes cross-company developer strategy, which includes things like driving for API quality standards across all of our API offerings, and continuing to grow and nurture our infrastructure and network engineering community, and continuing to help Cisco to reach enterprise application developers. So that's the core of what I do right now.
Thanks. Justin?
Hi, my name is Justin Fitzhugh. I work at Snowflake, title is Vice President of Cloud Engineering and Product Security. Here, I'm responsible for the technical infrastructure across all the cloud platforms, how we manage, how we engineer that platform, as well as the production security side. So doing our threat modeling and looking at new features and how they can be as secure as possible. Previous to this, I did a few different stints, one building a CDN. I worked at Mozilla Firefox and at Jive and various different environments building kind of large scale platform infrastructure.
And finally, Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Gerrity. I'm the Senior Vice President of Developer Services at Oracle. And so my team is responsible for the services and programs, everything that's necessary for developers to take ideas all the way through to production at scale in the cloud. And before Oracle, I worked at AWS for about 5 years on some of their platform, high volume, high throughput systems. And I'm glad to be here, honored to be invited, and happy to be participating.
That's awesome. So before I ask any question, I want to make sure I start you. I'll thank you at the beginning, and hopefully I'll remember to thank you at the end. But I really want to thank you guys for sharing some of your time and wisdom with the community as well. So I think I just want to start off by asking just kind of the most generic question. You know, when we think about cloud engineering and healthy teams and healthy organizations, you know, how do we think about, you know, the characteristics or measuring a successful organization, or what's the most important signal to you that things are going well, or how do you measure KPIs? Kind of an open-ended question, but sort of how do you define a successful team? So I don't know, I'll rotate a little bit. So why don't we start this one with Justin, and we'll get everyone's point of view on the topic.
That's a great question. I think that this continues to morph and iterate as companies grow and go through different phases. But one of the ways that I look at specifically successful cloud engineering organization is how many, we strive quite a bit to move towards building platforms that are self-service and not being the blocker and not being standing in the way. Historically, DevOps/cloud engineering is often kind of the one who's, I wouldn't say standing in the way, but everybody needs, and massive amounts of dependencies are inbound against the organization. And so one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of defining a successful organization and how are we enabling the business is getting out of that critical path. Well, still being in a path by building a platform, but not having our staff or any kind of manual processes be in that path. Instead, building systems or platforms or infrastructure that people can leverage and self-service and really being an enabler to the business moving fast and quickly. So that's one area that we're looking at kind of as a key measurement for success in the organization.
Yeah, and do you measure things like velocity formally, or
we do?
Kind of
there's a lot of ways that I think there's certainly a feeling, but as we go through, we do kind of a quarterly planning cycle, and every quarter we look at how many inbound dependencies. And so you can look at that metric and you can look at that number, and you can also look at the type of requests that are coming in. Are they single one-off tickets asking you to build a specific VPC, or are they including you, or is it a cross-functional project that you're a part of? The latter is much more what we're focused on. And so I think you look at the number of kind of dependencies that are being asked, and as that starts to come down, I think that's a measure of success. There's also kind of a less kind of just more of a feeling as you go through, kind of, do people feel like they're constantly blocked, and like, does the team feel overwhelmed, and or is it always oversubscribed, or can we service all of the requests that are coming in with the capacity we have? That's another measurement, I think, of success. And so we've been watching that and kind of moving more in that direction.
Cool. So Grace, you talk to developers every day. I know that there's no developer in the world that ever feels overwhelmed, and they can obviously service any request. But so sort of same question, but sort of from a different point of view. What are you hearing from developers? And you're welcome to build on points about self-service, because I do think that's an important trend for development teams. And of course, velocity is important to any manager. But you see all different sizes and scopes, and Cisco itself has different business units in different stages of development. So how do you think about cloud engineering success?
Sure. I think, one, I'll take this from a couple of different angles, because Cisco is a network infrastructure company that also has a lot of software and APIs to help with the automation piece. And so for us, it's really vital for us to track NPS and CSAT scores in terms of developers' engagements with us and how they're viewing those API experiences, those developer experiences that they have. And we own that strategy across the company in terms of making sure that quality is consistent, that they're getting what they need to have like a seamless experience as they're doing their automation and programmability, for being able to manage at scale the devices that they have, to be able to do that without getting on a CLI and to minimize the manual nature of some of the work that they used to do, right? So that's a transformation process. So from our point of view, what we've been doing over the last 5-6 years is really helping that shift and transformation of many IT organizations from that command line to programmability. And that actually required a lot of teaching and mentoring and getting people to get comfortable with scripting, basic scripting, which was, actually really scary for a lot of these network and infrastructure engineers. Some of them actually said to us, I'm a hardware guy. I don't know if I want to do this programming thing. So we had to make it palatable for them to get engaged with us around those things. And we've actually gotten 10,000, 13,000 developers certified on our experiences on Cisco, so that they can actually leverage our APIs to automate the work that they do and remove some of those issues that happen when you're doing copy and paste in a command line. So that's part of what's happened there. And then for us internally, we have a dashboard that we keep to ensure that we're getting a level of quality and consistency across the APIs that we publish. Because we started with CLIs, the process of API publishing was very different across the different groups. So now we're trying to drive a level of consistency and standards so that when you use an API from Cisco, it's as consistent as possible, because our developers and partners see us as one company.
Awesome, thanks. So Dan, I think, so Grace highlighted a few interesting things when you're building a platform, things like quality, scale, consistency. You've had experience at some of the largest cloud provider platforms in the world, not to say Snowflake's a teeny weeny company, but AWS, OCI, those things are obviously important to you. So how do you think about success of cloud engineering, partly as provider and partly as you're helping people onboard to the platforms?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and we do sort of have our two constituencies. So I sort of look at our internal teams and say, how do we measure them? And then also we want to, our product is a service for our developers, and we want to make sure that they're happy. So kind of a mix of both. So kind of what Grace was saying, when I'm looking externally, we're looking at NPS, we're looking at PSAT, we're looking at surveys, we're looking at feedback. All of our console operations now have, we have a feedback service, and it records what people are trying to do while they're trying to do it. So my team, Developer Services, is all about making the developer experience great. And I think that in the cloud, making the developer experience great is, yes, it's about documentation, it's about APIs, it's about the CLI, it's about the console, but it's also about the complexity in the services that are offered. And so that's really what we're going for, developers being successful. That's what we want to measure. Now, internally, it's a little bit different. So internally, we are focused on trying to leverage some of the strengths of Oracle, which include, for example, security. Oracle databases for 30 years have been trusted with important PII, credit card data, that kind of stuff. So we want to make sure that we're focused on security, of course. But then operations is a close second. So again, our product is a service. Our customers expect our service to be available. So availability is a key metric for us. So all the way down, we have what we call case metrics, which are customer. I'm not even sure what it stands for, but it's basically the customer's experience. And so like most of our services looking for 4 nines. And then we measure time to detect in the case of incidents, time to mitigate, and time to fully recover. And those are the 4 key metrics on which I hold my teams accountable. I think it's because we're serving customers, we obviously need to look at those metrics, CSAT, NPS. How are our developers doing? Are they able to get their job done? And then internally, yeah, it's effectively security, operations, and a little bit of velocity.
Yeah. No, so I think it's interesting. So, obviously, if you're a giant serving, tens of thousands of developers, it's important to actually literally measure NPS and send out surveys. But even if you're a platform team within an organization, that same type of feedback, am I serving my business units, getting that feedback on, our quality, our availability, our security, and making sure the business units trust you, and thinking about the fact that there has to be some, feedback loop involved, some sense of prioritization. A lot of us are building platforms for multiple internal groups. Everyone's got their favorite feature. Everyone wants to take the infrastructure guy out for a cup of coffee, and hope that you can get your favorite developer to implement your feature. And yet, the infrastructure, developers are often under a tremendous amount of pressure, and the sense of prioritization within a team, I think, is super important. So with that, I know, some of the these things are easy to talk about, but I think it's also interesting to talk about some of the key challenges that people face, whether that's hiring or developing developers in terms of career skills and growth. Some of us are dealing with multi-cloud. Some of us have to deal with security and compliance in very different ways. So I'm kind of curious on what we think the most important challenges are, and maybe if you have some suggestions on how to address them. I don't know. Maybe you can build on that, Dan.
Yeah, sure. It's funny, you were asking about how we measure our teams, and I gave sort of what we call the output goals. But the question is, how do you get to 4 nines of availability? And the answer there is DevOps. And, it's interesting because, what I would say is one of the biggest challenges we face is that developers, engineers come out of university and they come out of other companies having a lot of experience with building, writing Java or Node.js or whatever the case may be on their laptop, running it in an alpha environment on their laptop, pushing it to a beta environment, and then letting it go. And they lack the curricula in these universities are not teaching things like, how does a team work together? How do you do code reviews? How do you push code? How do you roll back something? How do you make a schema change with a rollback in case something goes wrong? And so one of the things that I'm doing with my team is we are going into these universities. Most of it's oriented toward HBCUs and HSIs, but we are working with universities to help them improve their curriculum to look more at a cloud-based service. And traditionally, you sort of had development and QA. And now it's end-to-end ownership, right? You've got service teams that are thinking about what the customer needs, designing it, architecting, designing, implementing, testing, pushing, and operating. And the DevOps component of that is not well understood. And so I think, there's two keys to that. One, in my experience, is really training new employees well and training them in working together as a team. And what that really means is, how you do code commits, how you do branching, how you do DevOps, how you scan your executables, how you manage to make your customers look like security and compliance gurus because you've done the hard work for them. So I think really it's about hiring the right people and then giving them the skills right away and then reinforcing that and helping adjust their expectations to understand that part of the job, yes, you get to write Java, you get to write all these great features, but you know what? Part of the job is pushing to 40 regions, 50 regions, 60 regions with automated rollback and automated deployment tools and configuration as code, et cetera.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is just bringing software engineering discipline to infrastructure development.
Yeah.
So Justin, is that the same thing that if you would put to list your top challenges, would it be, continuing to bring a software engineering mindset to infrastructure development, or does some other of these challenges pop to your head that we haven't talked about? Or
no, definitely. Actually, building on what Dan said, I think that we're actually progressing past what I consider DevOps and taking Cloud Edge to look. What we want Cloud Edge to really look like just another area of engineering that happens to be focused on infrastructure and that tooling, right? And we really continue to focus on each component as they build it. They have this kind of end-to-end ownership. It's not just that they write a service, they throw it to the wall and hope it works in QA, and then DevOps goes and runs it and takes the pager. Very much we're focused on how do we build a platform, how do we build an infrastructure that is scalable, and then work with or maybe embed with those teams so that they can then run. We built within cloud engineering a production engineering team. Facebook and some other teams have kind of the similar concept, where that team's wholly focus is a set of very senior engineers that go and work with various different component teams to build in scalability, reliability, manageability into their components so that they have that tool set, but then they can also operate it on their own. And then what we're doing in cloud engineering is building that platform. So maybe the observability stack, the infrastructure stack, or the Kubernetes platform, but have it very easy to use, and they can operate their own infrastructure. And then we start to, cloud engineering really looks much more like just another engineering team focused on the infrastructure pieces. And what that does is actually ties back to what you were just saying, Eric, around any kind of infrastructure change should look like a commit, should flow through the same kind of processes that you see in the rest of software engineering. So how do we adopt those generally accepted software engineering practices into that infrastructure world? And how do we build a platform that kind of facilitates that? And that's really where we've been focusing on from a cloud engineering perspective. So it dovetails nicely with what Dan was talking about, I think, as well.
Yeah, so I think, so you clearly get from the shift from DevOps to cloud engineering, if you will, which is sort of why we adopted the moniker. So Grace, I'm curious if you could talk about, how do you think we can accelerate that shift? So part of it is training. You're obviously an expert in training, thousands of engineers. Maybe the woman who's running, 20 engineers in her group needs to think about, sort of a different mindset moving from DevOps to a, more robust, cloud engineering culture. What are some of the, tips and trips to bring out that culture overall?
And I love that you're addressing the perspective of culture. That's exactly it, right? Which is, we're still seeing a lot of these silos in organizations, right? Where DevOps is in some corner in ops, and then you've got your application engineers in some line of business, and then there's this finger pointing stuff that's happening. And so the real transformation that needs to happen in industry is to bring these two groups in a unified way. Yes, you can have some specialties, but there needs to be a level of transparency in the full stack observability tools that you use, all the way from the top, all the way down to the bottom of the stack, into the containers, the microservices themselves, so that as these teams are working in unison, right, they have the same shared visibility of what's going on where, and can share the responsibility of how to debug, how to fix that issue, and make sure that things are, to have that real uptime. And when it's not having that uptime, understanding, is there a problem at the edge? Is there a problem in this microservice? How do we decouple those things but work together culturally as one unified cloud engineering practice, both the DevOps side plus the engineering application side. I think that's really the magic that needs to happen. And I think that we're just at the very early stages of making that possible with full stack observability tools like App Dynamics and other tools that we have, like Thousand Eyes. And those things will help to create that transparency where that finger pointing probably gets reduced, because then there's a level of responsibility that you can have, whether you're getting that FSO data within the IDE, right? Having that transparency as you're building as a developer, or that transparency in the dashboard that you look at day to day as an ops or IT person. I think that's super important. And on top of that, I think publishing and sharing those best practices and conversations like this, super important, because it can't happen without that level of like conversation, discussion, and willingness to shift how we do things today in those silos, and to really have that shared responsibility and that mentality of being a team, a winning team together, so that you can accelerate that digital transformation in your organization.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think if you sort of compare where we were, a few years ago to where we are today, obviously the DevOps or cloud engineering practitioner, obviously the culture has changed. If I go to Justin's case, certainly when you were doing builds at Mozilla a few years ago compared to how you do cloud engineering today, I'm sure there's a little bit of a difference. So for people who are still early in the CI/CD journey, maybe, and are working to increase their velocity, maybe for some groups, maybe even staging and production are new, concepts to think about. Can you think about some of the pitfalls maybe as people are going through this cultural and engineering transformation that that you've hit or that people may hit, and how can people avoid them? Can we benefit from the pioneers that have the arrows in their back, so to speak? What would you advise people who are sort of just starting this transformation journey? Oh, Justin, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was waiting for you to prompt us for someone to start. I think it's a great question. That I think that one, a lot of this sounds fantastic in terms of theoretical and kind of it's a great vision. And then when you go to implement this, it gets messy real fast, right? I mean, because you have culture shifts, you have people changing. I think Grace called this out earlier, that people have to shift, and they get worried about the technology changes and stuff. And so I think one of the keys for us was embracing the fact that kind of the current operational workload and that skill set is equally as important as the software engineering skill set, and that it's just a matter of shifting it and bringing that team together as a whole. I think a pitfall that I've seen is where you kind of go build this new team of Swedes and they're the new thing, and everyone kind of looks at that, but the people who are actually keeping the lights on and keeping the boat afloat and keeping the business moving may feel devalued, or may feel like their skill set isn't valued. But in fact, it's incredibly valuable. It's just, how do we shift that kind of, and how do we shift that team and that talent along with it? Because you can't lose that. You need to bring that along and integrate it. And I think that it's a challenge to do, because you're trying to shift and you're trying to set a direction, but at the same time, bring those people and help them kind of along that path. And I think that's difficult. So I think the advice, or what I would say, is make sure you don't lose sight of the value and really how important that work is on the operational side as you make that shift, and make sure you bring the team along as a whole, as opposed to kind of a lift and shift replacement, which will surely not go well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you bring up some interesting point. It's a change for teams, and it's a change for leaders, and making sure they bring the whole team together.
And the rest of the organization too. It's not, I mean, even outside of cloud, it's like the engineering, the rest of engineering, I think, has to come along on that journey as well. So yeah.
I think that's it. So Dan, anything to add to the pitfalls?
I think, as with most things, you want to begin with the end in mind. So for us, for example, 4 nines of secure service, period, full stop, right? And now we at Oracle, we're approaching 100 different regions. And if you can imagine 100 regions, that we have all these different compute shapes, all different memory shapes. We have the containers that all need different, levels of memory disk, database connections, et cetera. So every region is slightly different. And so when you start by telling the teams, okay, 4 nines secure, Now, what does that really mean? That means you need to have great deployment practices. You need to have automatic rollback. You need to have tooling. You need to have configuration as code. You can't just push code like in the old days. And so I think when people really start to begin that and focus on that, time to detect, time to mitigate, time to recover, rolling things out with, and we actually have everyone test their rollback as part of the deployment. So you can't deploy until you've tested your rollback. And so those kinds of things, I think, sort of a singular focus on what's the objective, and then working backwards from that to get what you need.
That's awesome. I think one of the other things we sort of hit on implicitly is that these new tools, coupled with the self-serve platforms that we're building, empower developers to a degree that they may not have been empowered in the past. So, a woman could go into work and boom, there's a giant, database instance that didn't exist, 10 minutes ago. Whereas in the past, that might be, I don't know, a 2-month procurement process. So how do we sort of balance, some of the power and of, self-empowerment that that developers are getting with some of the discipline and rigor that we want? I don't know, Grace, any ideas on how to maximize the strengths of the empowerment and yet embrace the corporate and team goals as well?
Yeah, I have to start with over the last decade and more, with the advent of cloud and self-serve SaaS platforms, it's been magic for developers, right? Because suddenly we can just use the free tier, put in a credit card, and start working with some new technology or service immediately. There's no I've got to get some IT person to provision it for me. It's going to take me a month or two, maybe I'll get it. It's an immediate gratification moment, right? Of I'm going to get to that aha moment as a developer and start playing around with this thing that I'm super interested in, and I'm going to bring it into my workplace. That's a very common thing I've seen over the last decade. And that optionality, that degree of flexibility can be super powerful, but it can also create a level of wild, wild west chaos, right? Especially in a large organization that for leaders like us can cause us massive headaches, because there's security compliance, there's governance, there's all sorts of things that developer may not have thought of. So you do have to strike a balance around what a developer, especially in a large enterprise, is going to be allowed to use in terms of self-provisioning and giving them that independence. And that gets down to standard deployments that you offer them out of the box. And those standard deployments need to be ones that you survey your engineering organizations and understand what are the needs, what are the major things that most of these engineering organizations really truly need, and make that as self-serve as possible. Now, there's always going to be some niche thing that some developer is going to want, and then you have to sort of address that as on a case-by-case basis and understand how that fits within your compliance and policy requirements across your different regions. So that's part of the striking the balance. And I would say, I think the mistake some organizations make is that you don't resurvey. You have to keep surveying, because technology and tools keep changing, right? So you have to keep advocating for collecting the right level of data to make sure that the self-serve options that you provide are the right ones at the right time for your engineering orgs.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I'll ask Justin for a little bit, building on the fact that the tools evolved as well. So one of the things is the tools themselves evolved to help with policy and compliance. And so, sort of same question to you. How do you think about, balancing this trade-off between development empowerment and, let's call it engineering discipline? And how do you use the new tools to sort of balance those two?
Yeah, I think it's the mindset that we take, again, is building a platform, and the developers are our customers. And how are we reducing the friction for them to use, try, manage, and build an application or a service as needed? And so I think we leverage these tools to create automation. But what we've also done is we've said, we have to have kind of this tooling distributed. So we've built kind of an overarching framework where we allow various individual engineering teams to build modules that plug into an overall framework that has a set API of kind of requirements and verification steps. Because I feel like if you try to centralize all of this and all the tools into one team, you just start to bottleneck the organization. And so I think there's striking a balance of, hey, we have an overarching framework that has specific APIs in terms of what it requires and verification, but giving some of that power back to them to kind of operate in that box. And then they have control of their specific piece of automation that kind of flows up into our overarching orchestration or automation tools. Leverage, and again, but they also can leverage various other tools like Pulumi, for example, in our case, for the specific purposes. But giving them some self-service, but putting some guardrails on overall, it seems to kind of be a good balance, and enlisting them to help solve this problem, as opposed to just saying, oh, we'll build this panacea, of a platform that's super easy to use, because we'll always be resource constrained and never be able to kind of keep up. And so we're trying to adopt kind of a little bit of a hybrid there, if that makes sense.
That does. Hey, I know, Dan has to walk the balance, walk the same tightrope that we all do. Any words of wisdom on the balance between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's interesting because I always, when we're speaking with customers, we talk about the 3 transformations that are necessary to move into the cloud. The first is technological. We all understand about these things. If you've got a relational database in your one data center and you're going to move to the cloud, you have to look at different technologies. And the second is the one we've been talking about, the cloud engineering and so forth. So moving to a continuous deployment type mindset, to an end-to-end ownership mindset, all of that. The third is the financial transformation. So all of a sudden your IT costs are going from a procurement cycle of capital expenditures into hey, an engineer walks in today and she spins up an instance of Snowflake. And, fortunately Snowflake is of course affordable and it has a great, free product, but you never know. And so, yeah, you have to kind of put some controls in place. And I think what we find is that really it needs to be cultural, because I think if you try to put controls on all these things, you're gonna end up defeating the whole purpose of the cloud. And so it really is it's a challenge. But I think again, it's these cultural transformations are what really has to happen. It's really not about the bits and bytes. It's really about the brains.
Yeah. So speaking, so I think that's a good summary. It really is partly the cloud engineering discipline, but also the cultural. I'll ask one cultural question, which people may not expect to chat about, but you can kind of notice from our backgrounds, we may not all be in traditional office environments, unless Grace works in the most beautiful office of all time. Certainly we're in a hybrid work environment, right? So we've got cloud engineers that are working from home or working from home part-time, or it's a little bit different in terms of how we collaborate. I think this trend has been going on for a long time. Pulumi itself is a remote first culture. There's many companies that are that way, but I think certainly in the last few years we've seen this accelerate. Are there any words of wisdom in companies that are sort of struggling with what the right culture in the hybrid environment is and how it affects operational discipline or software engineering, or how you think about planning, or I think I know it's a topic that we talk about back and forth a lot, and sometimes it's hey, how often are the engineers coming into work versus hey, do you meet up casually when you're working across time zones? How do you think about it? So I don't know, I'll ask Grace to share her experience and we'll sort of loop around and then summarize.
Sure. So for us, we've been very fortunate. We have a collaboration platform called WebEx, which is both our video platform plus also our chat and sharing platform. And so when the pandemic hit, it gave us the opportunity to actually accelerate some innovations we'd already been thinking about in the backlog, because suddenly there was a huge demand for a lot of things that we needed to enable the level of collaboration that was really required in this completely virtual world. And no one was expecting everyone to suddenly be in, like thousands, tens of thousands of employees and our customers had to suddenly shift to. And so we're fortunate in being like customer zero for the early innovations around those things. So things like uptime, we could create notifications in our WebEx team spaces that would notify us if anything went wrong with any of our developer services, right? That was super important. I think the level of communication has to go up when you're in these hybrid modes, right? Because as you all probably have experienced, there's a level of FOMO that happens in pockets of your team. We're like, I wasn't in that meeting. How come I wasn't in that meeting? So from a culture shift, you have to set expectation. Reduce the meetings, use the tools at your fingertips instead for offline collaboration, for that transparency, whether it's SharePoint or Confluence and having that planning in a very transparent location so that anybody can comment on it and give feedback and not have to feel like they have to be in every meeting in order for their opinion to count. In fact, that can all be done offline. And there are plenty of collaboration tools like WebEx that can facilitate both the offline and online pieces for that hybrid mode. And as a company, we are completely committed to hybrid work. So working where our employees need to work, whether it's in completely virtual mode for their work or being part-time in the office. And so that's something we are committed to as a company to ensure that we understand the needs of both our internal, our tens of thousands of employees, or the needs of our many, many customers that depend on us with WebEx.
Cool. Dan, anything to talk about in terms of your experience in working with hybrid teams across, customers, partners?
Yeah, I think when the pandemic hit and we just instantly went to 100%, work from home organization, with 40,000 developers. And the first thing we noticed is that productivity increased, like the number of commits, the amount, and, per commit, basically people committing on the weekends. And, so I think hopefully, predicted a bit of burnout if we didn't manage it carefully. And so I think with us, one primary concern, at least of mine, is inclusiveness. And we sort of have this philosophy of leave no employee behind. So the pandemic affects different types of individuals differently. It can affect women differently. It can affect people of color differently. And so we want to make sure that we maintain this inclusive discipline. So we've developed a set of guidelines. For example, we always use video, just because so much of what we communicate is actually communicated visually and not just hearing a voice. And also because we want to have this inclusive environment and not everyone's voice is heard equally loudly, so to speak. So there's that. There's no meeting after the meeting. So, in the old days, you'd have a meeting and then everyone would walk out in the hall, and then the real meeting would happen. So we talk about no meeting after the meeting, making sure everyone's included in the decision-making process. And so we have a couple of rules like that. Zoom. So Zoom is a big customer of Oracle's, and we're probably running on Oracle's cloud right now for this conversation. But we want to make sure that we're using that technology in every single meeting. So I think things like that help people feel included, and really it's inclusion that's the bottom line issue at stake here.
Yeah. So Justin, you had to navigate hybrid work while you were growing like crazy.
Well, yeah, I was going to say the other two organizations on here are very much larger, but I'd say we went through kind of our hyper growth phase when we went public. It was actually all remote. It was during the pandemic, and so we've gone through this massive growth phase. There's probably, I'd say, 50% of my team that for a while I had never met in person. It was kind of an odd thing, and we started coming back. But what I'll say is a couple of things the way we managed through it. First off, I'll echo Dan's point about burnout. While productivity went out, people really, especially after the first year, we started to see a lot of burnout and odd frustrations or behaviors. And so we at Snowflake kind of adopted what we call these snow days. And so there are these random days that we just give people off and they just take them off. And it was surprisingly, at first it was like, I don't know, but that was surprisingly effective. I'd say second of all, we've started to adopt more of kind of an asynchronous work culture. Previously, we were very synchronous in terms of meetings, presentations. We've really started to look at how do we adopt some of the policies. Even Amazon has around 6 pages and such of documenting and commenting and then showing up for conversation, but trying to let people, especially internationally, be able in different time zones, be able to interact and kind of grow. I think that's really important. And the third piece is, while we operate in kind of a hybrid mode, but I think we haven't lost the value that the fidelity of in-person communication and interaction is actually really an important thing. And so I'm actually sitting in our offices right now. We've opened our offices and we're encouraging people to come back as they feel comfortable, when they feel comfortable. And I think also taking a little bit of a, we'll try out various things and iterate in terms of what that hybrid work philosophy looks like going forward. So, I think this is almost now woven into the Snowflake culture because we almost built that culture in the pandemic. And so it's hard to separate what it was before versus what it is now. And so I think we have some core values around still wanting to have a physical presence and in presence, and physical and or face-to-face interactions, but it's certainly not where it was before, where kind of this 9 to 5, 5 days a week. That's I don't know of any company that's really going back to that. Maybe a few, but not us. So I'd say we're navigating through it, and lastly, I'd say just stay agile, right? I mean, a month ago, we probably thought something different than we did today than we will in a month from now, and so I think we're just going to kind of continue to iterate and roll with it on what works best for our employees and for our engineers.
Yeah, and I think that always learning mindset is incredibly important, and care for the employees and team as well. So, Pulumi also adopted the we didn't have a witty name like Snow Days, but also we have a summer vacation coming up, which I'm sure a lot of us are excited about. But it's so hard to find great engineering talent and nurture that talent. The last thing you want is your team burning out on you, and I think that is important. So a lot of times we talk, we need to do X, we need to do Y, we need to comply, we need to scale, we need to grow. But as managers who are leading these teams, we need to take care of our people, first and foremost, and make sure we show our gratitude. So I think with that, it's a great closing point for me to show my gratitude for you guys, Justin, Grace, and Dan, for sharing some time and the benefit of your experience. And I think all of us as cloud engineering leaders, are consistently going through these problems, kind of to build on Justin's point. We're always learning. The culture shift is always going on. Today's culture, as great as it is, it will be different, a few years from now. It'll be way different, 10 years from now. In addition to our businesses changing, and bringing that, software engineering, discipline as software engineering continues to evolve with better tools, techniques, workflow, asynchronous work. We need to make sure we continue to take the best of software engineering and bring that to, cloud engineering. So with that, I want to thank the people that watched this far for spending some time with us. And I hope you have a great day or a great night. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric.